What if I told you the ancient Egyptians had sleep habits that completely defy our modern logic? Picture a civilization that didn't just see sleep as a time to rest, but as a sacred, mystical gateway to the divine, a moment when dreams weren't just figments of imagination, but messages from the gods themselves. This wasn't merely about getting a good night's rest. It was a profound act woven into the very fabric of their spiritual and medical beliefs. Imagine lying down at night not just to recharge your body, but to invite visions, receive divine guidance, and even heal your deepest ailments through rituals that blended magic, science, and faith in ways that still leave historians and scientists in awe today. For the Egyptians, sleep was far more than a biological necessity. It was a bridge between worlds. They believed that as you drifted into slumber, your soul could travel, commune with deities, and bring back wisdom, warnings, or cures. Their bedrooms weren't just places for comfort. They were sanctuaries, often aligned with celestial events, and filled with amulets, incantations, and specially prepared potions meant to invite, or sometimes ward off supernatural visitors. Can you imagine closing your eyes each night not knowing whether you'd wake up with a prophetic dream or a healing vision? This deep, almost reverent relationship with sleep reveals a people profoundly connected to the unseen, a culture that saw the night not as an emptiness to be feared, but as a canvas for divine interaction. This journey we're about to take isn't just a dive into history, it's an exploration of human curiosity and the timeless desire to make sense of the mysterious. You'll discover how these ancient rituals challenge everything we think we know about rest, consciousness, and our place in the universe. From temple sleep therapies to dream interpreters who held positions of immense power in Pharaoh's court, the practices we'll uncover are as fascinating as they are bewildering. So settle in, open your mind, and allow yourself to be transported to a world where each night held the potential for magic, medicine, and revelation, a world where sleep was anything but ordinary. To truly grasp the profound and almost otherworldly nature of Egyptian sleep, you have to step into their mindset, where the line between the living and the dead was far more porous than it is for us today. They saw a direct and powerful parallel between falling asleep and dying. Each night, as an individual closed their eyes and drifted into unconsciousness, it was seen as a small rehearsal for the final journey of the soul, a temporary miniature death. This wasn't a frightening concept, but a sacred one, a natural part of the continuous cycle of existence. Just as the sun god Ra died each evening as he descended into the underworld only to be reborn at dawn, so too did a person's consciousness undergo a nightly transformation. This brings us to a crucial Egyptian word, a key that unlocks their entire philosophy of sleep, kepru. It translates to become, or more magically, to transform. This wasn't just a simple change, it was a metamorphosis, a process of becoming something new. When an Egyptian lay down to sleep, they were engaging in an act of kepru. Their soul, their ba, was believed to be temporarily released from the body's confines. This liberated spirit could then travel to realms inaccessible to the waking, communing with gods, receiving wisdom from ancestors, or navigating the treacherous beauty of the Jewat, the Egyptian underworld. The bed itself was far more than a piece of furniture. It was a sacred portal, a liminal space where the veil between our world and the next grew thin. This belief system turned every bedroom into a potential chapel, and every dream into a potential divine message. Imagine the weight and wonder of that experience. You wouldn't just go to bed tired from a day of building monuments or farming along the Nile. You would prepare for a journey. This is why we find headrests made of precious materials like ivory or ebony, often inscribed with protective spells or images of gods like Bes, who guarded sleepers from malevolent forces. They weren't just for comfort, they were ritual objects designed to facilitate this sacred transition and protect the vulnerable, traveling soul. The act of sleep was, therefore, an active spiritual practice. It was a time for healing, for prophecy, and for maintaining the cosmic order by mirroring the journey of the gods themselves. Waking up was a rebirth, a return from the divine with new insights or a refreshed spirit, ready to face the new day's challenges. And this sacred journey wasn't just a matter of closing your eyes and hoping for the best. It was a carefully orchestrated practice with very specific physical instructions. The ancient Egyptians paid meticulous attention to the body itself during sleep, believing that how you position yourself could directly influence both your physical health and your spiritual safety. Medical papyri, like the famous Ebers papyrus, didn't just list remedies, they offered precise guidance on sleep posture, viewing the body's alignment as a conduit for wellness or a shield against unseen dangers. For instance, sleeping on the left side was highly recommended to aid digestion, a practice that modern science now acknowledges can help reduce acid reflux. They observed the body's inner workings with an intuitive understanding, prescribing this position to allow the stomach to settle naturally, ensuring a more restful and physically beneficial night. Conversely, resting on the right side was often advised to protect the heart. While their anatomical knowledge wasn't as detailed as ours, their observations led them to believe this posture relieved pressure on what they correctly identified as a vital organ. This wasn't merely practical health advice, it was a form of preventative magic. By positioning the body correctly, they were aligning themselves with the principles of Mat, the cosmic order of balance and harmony. A night of sleep was an opportunity to restore balance within the body's own miniature universe, and the correct posture was the first step in that nightly realignment. Perhaps most intriguing was the posture adopted by the priesthood, and those seeking profound spiritual connection, the fetal position. This was far more than a comfortable way to sleep. By curling into the form of a child in the womb, they were physically enacting the concept of Keperu, of transformation and rebirth. As they slept in this coiled shape, they symbolically returned to the beginning, to a state of pure potential. The act of waking up and uncurling was then a literal reenactment of being born anew, mirroring the sun god Ra's rebirth at dawn. It was a powerful somatic ritual, using the body's own form to signal the soul's readiness for its journey and its return, hoping to emerge each morning not just rested, but spiritually refreshed and realigned with the forces of creation. This meticulous attention to the body's position reveals a culture that saw no separation between the physical and the spiritual. Every detail, from the grandest temple right to the simplest act of lying down, was part of a continuous, sacred whole. Given this deep spiritual significance placed on the very act of sleeping, it's no surprise that what happened during that state, the dream itself, was considered one of the most powerful and direct lines of communication with the divine. For the ancient Egyptians, dreams were not random neural firings, they were intentional messages, carefully delivered from the gods to the mortal realm. This wasn't a passive experience of receiving whatever the mind conjured. It was an active, sought-after form of divine consultation. Individuals would present their most pressing problems, from unexplained illnesses to weighty political decisions, and then intentionally seek out a dream that would provide the God-sent answer. The entire process was built on a foundation of profound faith that the universe was listening and would respond. This practice of seeking divine dreams had a specific name: incubation. It was a formal, ritualized procedure, far removed from simply going to bed and hoping for a sign. Those seeking guidance, particularly healing, would travel to a temple dedicated to a deity known for their power in this realm. While many gods could send visions, two were especially revered for this practice. Serapis, a later Greco-Egyptian god who combined aspects of Osiris and Apis, was a major figure of healing and prophecy. But perhaps even more intimately connected to the sleeper was Bes, the dwarf god we mentioned earlier. Unlike the majestic, distant gods like Ra or Osiris, Bes was a household protector, a guardian of childbirth, sleep, and dreams. His fearsome, grotesque appearance was believed to scare away evil spirits that might disrupt a sacred dream or bring a harmful vision. To sleep under the watchful eye of Bes was to enter a protected dream space, safe for divine communication. The ritual began long before the seeker ever lay down to sleep. They would first undergo purification rites, which might involve fasting, bathing in sacred waters, and offering prayers and sacrifices to the temple gods and priests. This was about making oneself a clean and worthy vessel for a divine message. The priests themselves played a crucial role as intermediaries, guiding the seeker through the correct rituals and often interpreting the resulting dreams, which were considered too potent and complex for the average person to decipher alone. After these preparations, the seeker would be led to a special chamber within the temple complex, a sacred dormitory often located near the inner sanctum, a place buzzing with spiritual energy. Here, surrounded by others on similar quests and enveloped by the scent of incense and the murmur of prayers, they would lie down on a simple pallet, not for comfort, but for revelation. The expectation itself would have been palpable. As they drifted into sleep, their mind would be focused entirely on their plea to the god. They weren't just asking for a generic good night's rest. They were petitioning for a specific answer, a cure, a prophecy. The dreamed response could take many forms. A sufferer of a persistent illness might dream of the god Serapis touching their afflicted body part, signaling the promise of healing. A pharaoh unsure about a coming harvest might receive a symbolic vision of either overflowing granaries or barren fields. The god might even appear and simply speak the answer directly. Waking up, the individual would then recount every detail of the dream to the temple priests, who would carefully analyze the symbols, narratives, and characters to extract the god's true meaning and prescribed course of action. This entire system reveals a society that viewed the subconscious mind not as a separate psychological space, but as a perfectly tuned receptor for cosmic wisdom. The dream was a neutral ground where humanity and divinity could meet and converse. The practice of incubation shows us they believed so firmly in this connection that they developed an entire ritual technology to facilitate it, turning something we consider an involuntary biological function into a voluntary spiritual technology. It was a deeply democratic concept as well. While the pharaoh's dreams were undoubtedly seen as most significant, evidence suggests that common people could also visit these temples seeking help, placing the power of divine revelation within reach of many, making the gods accessible in a way that grand temple ceremonies never could. Now, if the dream itself was the message and the body's posture was the ritual, then the ancient Egyptians' pillow was their first line of defense. We have to completely reframe what we think of as a pillow today. For us, it's about softness and comfort, a plush cloud to cradle our head. For an Egyptian, comfort was almost a secondary concern to spiritual security. Their headrests, or WRS, were typically carved from a single block of wood, stone, or even precious ivory, and they were anything but soft. They were hard, elevated stands, often curved to support the neck, lifting the head high off the ground. This practical design had a physical benefit in a hot climate. It allowed for air circulation around the head and helped keep intricate wigs and hairdos intact. But the true purpose ran far deeper into the realm of magic and metaphysics. Lifting the head had a powerful symbolic meaning. By raising this most important part of the body, the sleeper was elevating their consciousness, physically positioning themselves closer to the realm of the gods and further from the dusty, chaotic earth. It was a deliberate act of separating the sacred from the profane at the very moment the soul prepared to journey. But more importantly, this vulnerable, elevated state required protection. The ancient Egyptians believed that the time of sleep was when a person was most susceptible to attack from malevolent forces, demons, evil spirits, and chaotic entities that roam the night. A sleeping person was an open door, and the head, the seat of the senses, and the soul needed a guardian. This is where these functional objects transformed into powerful magical talismans. A simple headrest was not enough. It had to be enchanted. Artisans would meticulously carve them with protective spells and incantations directly into the material. These weren't mere decorations, they were permanent prayers, activated every single night by the weight of the sleeper's head. The words themselves were a shield, creating a sphere of safety around the individual. Common inscriptions called upon the gods to place yourself under the head of this blessed one, or two, keep watch over the sleeper, and repel the enemies of Ra. They were creating a sacred, fortified space for the soul's journey, and the most crucial elements of this defense system were the images of the gods themselves, specifically chosen for their protective powers. Bes, the dwarf god with his leonine face and tongue sticking out, was a favorite. His grotesque, fearsome appearance was precisely the point, It was meant to be so shocking and fierce that it would scare any approaching evil spirit right back into the shadows. He was the divine bouncer for the bedroom. Equally important was the goddess Taweret, the hippopotamus-headed protector of women and childbirth. While she was strongly associated with motherhood, her role extended into the night. As a fierce guardian against dark forces, her image on a headrest served as a potent symbol of defense and safe transition, ensuring not just physical safety, but also spiritual purity during this vulnerable state. Imagine the nightly ritual. An Egyptian, before laying down, might trace the carved image of Bes with their finger, muttering a short prayer. They would then carefully position their neck on the cool, hard surface, trusting that this object was so much more than furniture. It was a guardian, a sacred boundary stone between the world of the living and the unseen realms. It was the spiritual equivalent of locking your door and setting an alarm before bed, a necessary precaution in a universe teeming with both benevolent gods and dangerous chaos. The humble headrest was therefore a perfect symbol of the entire Egyptian sleep philosophy, a seamless fusion of the practical and the magical, the everyday and the divine, all dedicated to safeguarding the miraculous and vulnerable act of sleep. This careful positioning within the home was only the beginning. The true architectural genius of Egyptian sleep reveals itself in the sacred alignment of the bed itself. The bed was never placed arbitrarily. It was a ritual object positioned with intentional precision to harness the very forces of the universe. The favored directions were overwhelmingly north and east, each chosen for its profound cosmological significance. Aligning the head of the bed towards the north, the realm of the circumpolar stars, was a direct attempt to connect with the eternal and the unchanging. Unlike other stars that set and rose, these northern stars, which the Egyptians called the imperishable ones, were always visible, forever fixed in the night sky. They were associated with Osiris, the god of the afterlife and resurrection, and by orienting themselves toward this eternal realm, sleepers hope to draw upon its qualities of stability and everlasting life, ensuring their soul's safe return each morning. An eastern alignment served a different but equally powerful purpose. The east was the source of all renewal, the place where the sun god Ra was reborn each dawn after his perilous journey through the darkness of the underworld. To sleep with one's head towards the east was to position oneself in the direct path of this daily rebirth, to invite that regenerative, victorious solar energy into one's own being. It was an act of sympathetic magic, a way of ensuring that just as Ra triumphed over chaos each morning, the sleeper too would awaken refreshed, renewed, and victorious over any spiritual malaise or physical ailment that plagued them. This alignment transformed the simple act of waking up into a personal participation in the most important cosmic event of each day. The bed frame itself was often crafted to reinforce this sacred geometry. Many were designed with headboards that were slightly raised or curved, not just for comfort, but to symbolically represent the hieroglyph for horizon, the Akhet, the mountain from which the sun emerged. This meant that literally and symbolically, an Egyptian's head rested upon the horizon each night, the very boundary between the world of the living and the divine. The materials used further amplified this connection. Beds were frequently made from wood, but the feet were commonly carved in the shape of animal paws, most often those of a lion. The lion was a potent solar symbol, a guardian creature associated with Ra and with pharaonic power. These leonine feet did more than just hold the bed off the floor. They placed the sleeper under the protection of a divine guardian, its powerful paws repelling snakes, scorpions, and malevolent spirits that might try to climb up from the chaotic ground below. This holistic approach to bedroom architecture, from its placement in the home to the cosmic alignment of the bed, and the protective symbols carved into its very legs, created a multi-layered sanctuary. It was a carefully constructed ecosystem designed for one purpose: to facilitate a successful and protected journey of the soul. Every element worked in concert. The rooftop location offered cool, clean air and a closer connection to the stars. The thick walls of an inner room provided security and silence. The north or east alignment harnessed cosmic energies. And the enchanted headrest and guardian lion feet defended against supernatural threats. Together, they formed a perfect ritual environment, a launch pad for the knight's divine voyages, and a safe harbor for the vulnerable human body, demonstrating an unparalleled understanding of how our physical surroundings can shape our most intangible spiritual experiences. But the ancient Egyptians didn't rely solely on cosmic alignments and protective amulets to ensure a successful knight's journey. They also developed a sophisticated pharmacological toolkit, blending botany and spirituality into powerful sleep potions. Their medical papyri, which served as both doctors' manuals and priestly ritual texts, are filled with recipes for herbal sedatives designed to calm the body, invite prophetic dreams, and even act as anesthesia for surgical procedures. At the heart of this ancient pharmacy were three particularly potent plants, each chosen for its specific properties and deep symbolic connections to the gods themselves. Perhaps the most famous of these was the opium poppy. The Egyptians were master cultivators of this flower, which they called shepen. They understood its powerful narcotic effects intimately. Harvesters would carefully score the seed pods to collect the raw, milky latex raw opium, which contained morphine and codeine. This potent substance wasn't smoked as in later cultures. Instead, it was meticulously dissolved into wine or mixed into beer, creating a potent sedative draft. A physician or priest might administer this mixture to a patient suffering from intense pain or unbearable insomnia, allowing the compounds to slow the nervous system and usher in a deep, pain-free sleep. But its use likely extended beyond mere physical relief. In a ritual context, this altered state of consciousness could have been seen as a way to gently force open the gates of perception, making the sleeper more receptive to the subtle whispers of the divine in their dreams. Then there was mandrake, a plant shrouded in mystique and danger across many ancient cultures. The Egyptians valued its root for its powerful tropane alkaloids, which are potent deliriants and sedatives. However, they were also acutely aware of its toxicity. The preparation was a careful, ritualistic process to avoid poisoning. The root was often sliced and soaked for extended periods in wine or beer, a method that would slowly leach the active compounds into the liquid while hopefully mitigating some of the more dangerous effects. Because of its strength and its often human-like root shape, mandrake was associated with potent magic. It wasn't a casual remedy, it was a serious tool, perhaps reserved for the most intense spiritual quests or the most severe ailments, where the risk was deemed necessary for the potential reward of a profound visionary experience or a healing trance. The most surprising and wonderfully symbolic ingredient, however, was lettuce specifically, a pungent, wild variety known as Lactuca cereola. This wasn't the crisp, bland lettuce we put in salads today. It was a bitter plant with a notable milky sap, or latex, which contained mild sedative and hypnotic properties similar to a weak opium. But its use went far beyond its mild pharmacological effect. This particular lettuce was sacred to the god Min, the deity of fertility and regeneration. The plant's rapid growth and its milky sap were potent symbols of life and potency. Yet, in a beautiful paradox, the Egyptians also observed that this vibrant, life-affirming plant had a relaxing, sleep-inducing quality. By consuming a potion made from this lettuce, a sleeper wasn't just taking a mild sedative, they were ingesting the essence of a god associated with vital force, perhaps hoping to absorb that regenerative power during their sacred nightly death and rebirth. It was a perfect example of their holistic view, where the symbolic power of a plant was just as important as its chemical properties. A typical recipe, as detailed in texts like the Ebers Papyrus, might instruct a healer to take seeds of the poppy, blend them with crushed mandrake root, and then steep this mixture in a jar of strong wine for several days. Chips of incense might be added for purification, and the whole concoction would be strained and administered in a small ceramic cup. The alcohol acted as a solvent, extracting the active compounds from the plants, and also as a delivery mechanism, helping the drugs enter the bloodstream more quickly. The result was a powerful, multifaceted potion that worked on both the body and the spirit. This wasn't crude guesswork. It was the result of centuries of careful observation, experimentation, and spiritual belief, all mixed together in a single cup, offered to a patient in the hope of granting them not just rest, but revelation. But with the soul traveling in such vulnerable realms, and the body lying still in a state resembling death, The ancient Egyptians believed this sacred time also attracted malevolent forces seeking to cause harm. The night was not just a canvas for divine messages, it was also a hunting ground for dangerous entities, and the most feared of these were the Aku. These were not demons in the traditional sense of being purely evil spirits from another world. The Aku were the restless, malevolent dead spirits of those who had been denied a proper burial, who had died violently, or who had been wicked in life and were now condemned to wander the edges of the mortal world. Bitter, envious, and chaotic, they were drawn to the life force of the living, and a sleeping person, with their soul partially absent, was a perfect target for their torment. An attack by an Aku was believed to be the root cause of what we would now call sleep paralysis or horrific nightmares. Imagine the sensation, waking up in the middle of the night, your mind alert but your body completely frozen, unable to move or cry out. Then, a crushing weight on your chest, the feeling of a presence in the room, and perhaps even a shadowy figure looming over you. Modern science explains this as a glitch in the sleep-wake cycle, but for an Egyptian, this was a literal spiritual assault. They interpreted this terrifying experience as an Aku attempting to steal their breath, crush their life force, or even hijack the soul's journey to prevent its return to the body. A bad dream wasn't just a bad dream, it was evidence of a successful intrusion by a hostile entity. This ever-present threat necessitated a robust defense system, turning the bedroom into a fortress warded by powerful magic. The first line of defense was the strategic placement of protective amulets around the sleeping area. The most common and potent of these was the Wedget Eye, or the Eye of Horus. This symbol represented the eye that the god Horus lost in his epic battle with Set, and was later restored by Thoth, making it a universal sign of healing, wholeness, and protection. By placing a Wedget amulet at the head of the bed or wearing one to sleep, an individual was invoking this entire myth of victory over chaos and the restoration of order, creating a shield of divine power around themselves. Another deeply personal amulet was the Isis knot, or Tayet, fashioned from red jasper or carnelian. Its blood-red color symbolized the life-giving power of the goddess Isis and her magical blood. It was believed to carry the same potent magic Isis used to resurrect her husband Osiris, and thus it could protect the sleeper from spiritual death and ensure their safe return to consciousness. For those seeking more direct and formidable guardians, small statues of the gods Bes or Taweret were placed vigilantly around the room. Their fierce, monstrous appearances were not for decoration, they were apotropaic, meaning they were designed to ward off evil by being more frightening than the evil itself. A spirit looking to cause trouble would see the gnarled face of Bes and think twice before approaching. Beyond physical objects, the spoken and written word held immense power. Spells from funerary texts like the Book of the Dead, though primarily intended for the afterlife, were adapted for use by the living. A person might recite a specific spell before bed, a verbal incantation calling upon Ra or Horus to stand guard through the night. For those who could afford it, these spells could be written on a piece of papyrus and placed under the bed or even on the headrest itself, transforming the written hieroglyphs into a permanent, active barrier. One common invocation might be something like, "O you demon who comes in the darkness, your face is turned backward. You shall not approach this body, you shall not haunt this bed, for the flame of Horus is against you." This wasn't a hopeful prayer, it was a command, a forceful assertion of divine authority designed to compel the threatening spirit to obey. This complex system of beliefs and protections reveals a profound and holistic understanding of the human experience. The Egyptians acknowledged that the night contained both incredible opportunity for connection and terrifying potential for danger. Their response was not mere superstition, but a sophisticated ritual technology that addressed both the psychological need for security and the spiritual belief in an interactive cosmos. They prepared for sleep by physically, magically, and verbally fortifying their space, ensuring that their journey into the unknown would be one of revelation, not ruin. Every amulet placed and every spell whispered was an act of participation in an eternal struggle between order and chaos, a daily reaffirmation of their right to seek the divine and return safely with the dawn. This sacred and mystical relationship with sleep reached its absolute zenith with the Pharaoh, who was not merely a king, but a living god walking the earth, the intermediary between the divine realm and the entire nation of Egypt. For everyone else, a dream might be a personal message. For the Pharaoh, his nighttime visions were matters of state security and national prosperity. His sleep was a public event, a divine council session where the fate of the kingdom could be decided. The entire cosmological framework we've explored, the soul's journey, the threat of evil spirits, the potential for divine communication, was amplified to its maximum power when it came to the royal bedchamber. A restless night for the Pharaoh wasn't just a personal inconvenience. It could signal divine displeasure or an impending crisis for the entire land. The rituals surrounding the Pharaoh's sleep were elaborate and meticulously overseen by the highest-ranking priests, who acted as both spiritual bodyguards and divine translators. Before the god-king even retired, the royal bedroom would be purified with incense and the chanting of spells from the Book of the Dead, creating a sacred barrier far more potent than any commoner could muster. His headrest, likely made of the finest alabaster or ebony inlaid with gold, would be inscribed with the most powerful incantations, calling upon Ra himself to stand guard. The alignment of his bed was perfect, aimed precisely to harness the cosmic energies of the northern stars or the eastern dawn. Every detail was calibrated to ensure his journey to the Jewat was successful and his return was guaranteed, for the stability of the entire world depended on it. Upon waking, the first order of business was the recounting of the royal dream. Court scribes and dream interpreters, priests schooled in the complex symbolic language of the gods, would be in attendance to carefully record every detail of the Pharaoh's vision. They weren't just listening for content, they were analyzing a divine dispatch. A dream about a lean cow devouring a fat one wasn't a bizarre nightmare about livestock. To a trained priestly interpreter, it was a clear and terrifying prophecy of 7 years of famine following 7 years of plenty, a message directly from the gods that required immediate political and economic action. The interpretation of these dreams was a science and an art, based on extensive dream manuals that cataloged symbols and their meanings. The priest's role was to crack this celestial code and translate it into a concrete plan for the kingdom. The most profound belief was that the Pharaoh's physical state in sleep was directly tied to the health of the land itself. This concept, known as Heka, was the magic that bound the universe together. A pharaoh who slept soundly and communed effectively with the gods was performing the ultimate act of Heka, maintaining the cosmic order of Maat. His restorative sleep ensured the Nile would flood its banks at the proper time, bringing the rich black soil that guaranteed a bountiful harvest. His victorious dreams, where he triumphed over chaos in the form of foreign gods or monsters, were believed to literally strengthen Egypt's borders and intimidate its enemies. Conversely, if the pharaoh suffered from insomnia or was plagued by bad dreams, it was a dire omen. It meant the bridge between the gods and Egypt was unstable, that chaos was seeping into the world, and that the Nile might fail to rise, leading to famine, social unrest, and defeat in battle. This made the pharaoh's rest the most important job in the kingdom. While his subjects slept for their own well-being, he slept for theirs. His nightly journey was a divine duty, a non-negotiable part of his royal workload. The immense pressure on him to dream well explains the army of priests, the powerful potions, and the extraordinarily fortified environment that surrounded his sleep. It was the ultimate expression of the Egyptian sleep philosophy, where the vulnerability of unconsciousness was transformed into the most powerful act of governance, a nightly reaffirmation of a contract between the gods and the people, with one divine man standing in the gap for everyone. This deeply spiritual, yet perilous, approach to the night was not a one-size-fits-all experience across Egyptian society. The fascinating world of dreams and sleep rituals was also sharply defined by gender, with distinct practices and expectations for men and women, each designed to harness the power of the night to fulfill their specific roles within the culture's rigid structure. Archaeological evidence, from the artifacts placed in tombs to the remains found in homes, reveals a clear divergence in how each gender prepared for their nightly journey, tailoring the universal beliefs to their personal needs and societal duties. For women, particularly those hoping to conceive, sleep was a potent time for magical intervention aimed at fertility and protection during childbirth. A woman might anoint her body with specially prepared perfumed oils before bed, but this was far more than an early form of aromatherapy. These unguents were often infused with herbs and symbols associated with powerful goddesses like Hathor, the deity of love, beauty, and motherhood, or Taweret, the fierce hippopotamus guardian of childbirth. Rubbing this enchanted oil into the skin was a physical act of inviting these divine forces into her body, making herself a receptive vessel for creation. She might also place charms or amulets under her pillow or headrest, a small figure of Bes to ward off evil spirits that could cause miscarriage, or a tayet knot, the symbol of Isis, to invoke the magic that resurrected Osiris and could thus grant the gift of life. The goal of these rituals was to cultivate and interpret very specific types of dreams. A woman seeking to become pregnant would hope for a vision of being approached by a god, of a flowing Nile, or blooming lotus flowers, all powerful symbols of fertility and successful birth. These weren't just hopeful signs, they were considered active assurances from the gods that her body was in harmony and ready to bear children. The bedroom became her private temple, and her sleep a dedicated ritual to secure her most critical function in society, becoming a mother and ensuring the family line continued. Conversely, the sleep practices of Egyptian men were overwhelmingly oriented towards success in the public and professional spheres, hunting, physical strength, and administrative victories. A scribe might focus his pre-sleep prayers on receiving clarity for a complex legal judgment he had to make, while a soldier would seek a dream that foretold victory in an upcoming battle or revealed the tactics of an enemy. Their protective amulets were less about fertility and more about raw power and safety. A common charm was the Eye of Horus, or Wedget, to ensure overall health and vitality, or a scarab beetle to symbolize transformation and successful rebirth each morning, ready to face the day's challenges. This division is physically etched into the artifacts they left behind. Excavations of tombs and homes have revealed headrests that, while following the same basic protective design, often differ in their inscriptions and iconography. A headrest buried with a man might be carved with scenes of hunting or contain spells praising his strength and calling upon solar gods like Ra for power. One made for a woman, however, is far more likely to feature images of Bes or Taweret and include incantations specifically for protecting the womb and ensuring healthy children. Even the beds themselves could reflect this. While a man's bed might be straightforward, a woman's bed, particularly in a wealthy household, might be part of a larger, more enclosed canopy structure, creating a private, sanctuary-like space intended for a childbirth and the sacred sleep that preceded it. This gendered division of nocturnal labor shows how the Egyptians applied their core spiritual beliefs to the practical realities of everyday life. Everyone feared the Aku and sought divine communion, but they channeled those universal fears and hopes towards goals that reinforced their place in the world. A man's successful dream was one that brought strength and order to the community, while a woman's was one that brought life and stability to the family. Together, these tailored practices wove the sacred act of sleep into the very fabric of societal duty, ensuring that each night's journey served a purpose that extended far beyond the individual and into the continued harmony and prosperity of the civilization itself. This sacred and protective approach to sleep extended even to the youngest members of society, where the line between a soothing lullaby and a powerful magical incantation was beautifully blurred. For Egyptian children, the process of being put to bed was a deeply ritualized act of protection, designed to shield their incredibly vulnerable souls during a time when their connection to the spirit world was believed to be at its most potent. A child's sleep wasn't seen as just deep, it was seen as perilously porous, their innocent spirits more likely to wander too far or attract the attention of malevolent forces. Therefore, every element of their bedtime routine, from the songs they heard to the objects that surrounded them, was meticulously crafted to create a fortress of safety. The most intimate of these protections was the lullaby. A mother or nurse singing to an infant wasn't merely crooning a gentle melody to induce drowsiness, she was performing a vocal shield, her voice becoming an instrument of divine power. These songs were often direct appeals to protective goddesses, with Hathor, the benevolent cow goddess of motherhood, love, and joy, being the most frequently invoked. A typical lullaby might softly call upon her to spread your wings over this child, or to let your milk be sweet in his dreams, symbolically offering the divine nourishment and shelter of a celestial mother. The melodies themselves were likely soft and repetitive, but the lyrics were potent spells, asking the goddess to stand guard against the demons of the night that were thought to cause sudden infant illnesses, night terrors, or the dreaded inability to wake. The very act of the mother's breath carrying these words was believed to charge the air around the crib with protective energy. Beyond the auditory shield of song, the physical space of the child's crib was fortified with amulets, transforming it from a simple bed into a sacred enclosure. The most common and powerful of these charms was the wedget, or Eye of Horus. This symbol, representing the eye that was damaged in battle and then healed by the god Thoth, was the ultimate emblem of wholeness, protection, and good health. A small faience, or carved stone wedget amulet, would be tied securely to the linen wrappings of an infant, hung from the side of a crib, or even subtly woven into the fabric of their bedding. Its presence was a constant, silent prayer for physical integrity, believed to actively repel the forces of disease and fragmentation that threatened a child's delicate body. It was the ancient equivalent of a modern vaccination card, a charm against the unseen pathogens of the spirit world, but the protection was often layered, acknowledging the variety of threats a child might face. Alongside the wedget, one might find a tiny ivory wand carved with the grotesque but reassuring figure of the dwarf god Bes. His role as a guardian of the household and children made him a constant presence in nurseries. His fierce face, intended to frighten away evil spirits by being more frightening than they were, was carved into headrests or painted onto the walls of the room itself. For a teething infant experiencing pain, a little amulet in the shape of a hippopotamus goddess like Taweret might be added, invoking her fierce protective energy not just for childbirth, but for the vulnerable early years of life itself. Even the child's jewelry was functional. Simple beaded necklaces often included a central amulet, and bracelets made of blue faience beads, a color associated with protection and the heavens, were common. This comprehensive system reveals a society that poured its deepest anxieties and its most powerful magic into ensuring the safety of its children. They understood an infant's vulnerability on both a physical and a spiritual level, and they addressed it with a holistic blend of soothing comfort and formidable divine authority. The mother's loving song and the cool touch of a protective amulet against the child's skin were two sides of the same coin, both working in concert to weave a cocoon of safety around the most precious and fragile members of the family, ensuring their journey into the world of dreams was not a venture into danger, but a guarded visit to the divine. To fully appreciate the Egyptian sleep schedule, we must first abandon our modern concept of time as a rigid, mechanical construct measured by clocks. For them, time was a living, breathing cycle deeply entwined with the rhythms of the cosmos. Their entire existence, including when they slept and woke, was orchestrated by the celestial dance overhead, a practice that granted them a harmonious existence with the universe that we have largely lost today. The relentless Egyptian sun dictated the most fundamental rhythm. The scorching heat of the midday hours, when the sun god Ra was at his most potent and punishing, made outdoor labor not just uncomfortable, but dangerous. This created a natural, practical incentive for a biphasic sleep pattern, a period of rest during the peak heat, followed by activity during the cooler mornings and evenings. But this practical adaptation was elevated into a sacred act through astronomy. The Egyptians were meticulous celestial observers, and their priests developed incredibly sophisticated tools to track the heavens. Among the most important for regulating daily life were the star clocks, intricate diagrams often found carved on the inside lids of coffins or on temple ceilings. These charts map the journey of 36 specific star groups known as decans. Each decan would rise consecutively on the horizon just before dawn, an event known as its heliacal rising, marking a 10-day period and, crucially, a specific hour of the night. By observing which decan was rising, a temple priest could accurately determine the time throughout the night, creating a celestial clock that was both precise and profoundly spiritual. This astronomical precision was directly applied to the question of when to sleep. The decan charts didn't just tell time, they indicated the quality of time. Certain hours of the night, ruled by specific decans and their associated deities, were considered more auspicious or more dangerous for the vulnerable state of sleep. The complex system helped priests advise the community on the most propitious times to begin rest or to awaken for prayer and work. For instance, the hours just before dawn, as the decan of Osiris rose, were seen as a time of powerful regenerative energy, making it an ideal moment to awaken and absorb that renewed vitality. Conversely, the deep night hours when the terrifying serpent demon Apophis was thought to be strongest might be a time for heightened protective rituals rather than deep, unaware slumber. This celestial guidance created a culture-wide sleep rhythm that was in perfect sync with the universe. Imagine a skilled artisan finishing his work as the heat intensified, sharing a meal with his family, and then retiring to the cool, interior room of his home, or perhaps even the roof to sleep during the hottest part of the afternoon. This rest was not a full night's sleep, but a vital recharge. As the sun began to set and the air grew cooler, the community would stir again. Evenings were a time for socializing, storytelling, and lighter labor. The main period of sleep would then commence later in the evening, but it was a sleep punctuated by the movements of the stars. A priest on temple duty or a keen-eyed farmer might wake at specific hours to note the passage of a decan, offering a prayer to the governing deity of that hour before returning to rest. This rhythm meant that an Egyptian sleep was rarely one solid, uninterrupted 8-hour block as we strive for today. It was a fluid, dynamic process that respected the natural environment and the spiritual landscape of the night. Their wakefulness was not a constant state, but an ebb and flow, allowing for moments of awe and observation under a canopy of brilliant stars. By aligning their rest with the cosmos, they did more than just avoid the heat. They participated in a divine order, believing that sleeping and waking at the correct celestial moments ensured personal health, spiritual purity, and the continued stability of the world itself. Their time was not measured in minutes, but in moments of cosmic significance, and their sleep was a willing surrender to that majestic star-filled clock. Yet for all its sacred purpose, the Egyptian pursuit of divine dreams through sleep also had a stark and demanding counterpart: the deliberate, ritualized use of sleep deprivation. This practice reveals a fascinating duality in their beliefs. If the right kind of sleep could open a gateway to the gods, then forcibly preventing it could be a tool to either break the human spirit or violently wrench that same gateway open. In the context of the law, sleep deprivation served as a potent and terrifying form of punishment. For a culture that viewed sleep as a mini-death and rebirth essential for maintaining one's place in the cosmic order, to deny someone this fundamental ritual was to attack their very soul. A criminal sentenced to prolonged wakefulness was being cut off from the divine cycle, left to languish in a state of exhausting limbo, unable to recharge their body or allow their soul to journey. This was psychological torment of the highest order, designed to disorient and degrade, making the individual more pliable for interrogation or simply crushing their will entirely as their connection to Maat, the fundamental order of the universe, frayed and snapped. However, within the hallowed walls of the temple, this same brutal practice was transformed into a sacred ordeal for initiates and priests seeking the highest levels of enlightenment. This was not punishment, but purification, a grueling test of devotion and endurance designed to forcibly induce the very visionary states others sought through potions and comfortable incubation. The logic was severe yet compelling. By pushing the body and mind far beyond their normal limits through sustained wakefulness, the priests believed they could shatter the ordinary barriers of perception. Exhaustion would act as a kind of brutal key, unlocking an altered state of consciousness where the veil between worlds grew thin not through gentle journeying, but through sheer, delirious fatigue. In this vulnerable, raw state, the initiate's mind would become a blank slate, hypersensitive and open to direct contact with the divine, or perhaps more accurately, too exhausted to resist it. These priestly trials were meticulously documented in temple texts, which describe rituals that could last for days. An initiate might be required to remain awake for 3 or 4 consecutive nights, surrounded by senior priests who would chant, drone, and perform complex rituals to prevent the candidate from slipping into unconsciousness. The environment itself was part of the toolset. Flickering torchlight, repetitive percussion, and the overwhelming smell of potent incense would all be used to overload the senses and maintain a state of heightened, if exhausted, awareness. This was not about comfort or invitation, it was about breaking through. The goal was to reach a point of hallucinatory clarity where the gods would not need to send a symbolic dream, but might appear directly before the initiate's waking eyes. The experiences that emerged from these ordeals were recorded as powerful, often terrifying visions. A priest might report seeing the jackal-headed Anubis leading a procession of the dead, or feel the scorching presence of Sekhmet, the lioness goddess of vengeance. These weren't the nuanced, symbolic dreams of temple incubation. They were raw, unfiltered, and visceral encounters. The temple authorities viewed these harrowing visions not as breakdowns, but as breakthroughs, the ultimate sign that the initiate had successfully traversed the boundary of normal human experience and touched the divine reality that lay beyond. Surviving this trial was the final proof of a priest's spiritual fortitude and worthiness to handle the most powerful mysteries of their faith. It was the dark reflection of the peaceful sleeper's journey, proving that the path to the gods could be walked not only on a comfortable bed aligned with the stars, but also on a grueling road of exhaustion, willingly endured in the pursuit of ultimate truth. The fascinating link between sleep and medicine in ancient Egypt is brilliantly illuminated by 2 of the most important medical documents ever discovered, the Edwin Smith and Ebers papyri. These texts reveal a medical system where sleep was not just a passive state of rest, but an active, prescribed therapy administered by physicians with the precision of a modern drug. For a headache, a fever, or a wound, the doctor's order might very well have been a directive to sleep, carefully induced and monitored as part of the healing process. This was a holistic approach that understood the body's restorative powers were at their peak during rest, and they leveraged that natural phenomenon with intentionality. The Edwin Smith Papyrus, the world's oldest known surgical treatise, offers a remarkably rational and clinical view of medicine. It presents a series of cases, each with a diagnosis, prognosis, and prescribed treatment. In several instances, the recommended therapy is simply to allow the patient to rest. For a severe head wound or a dislocated jaw, the physician would set the injury and then instruct the patient to remain still and sleep, recognizing that the body's own regenerative processes needed time and tranquility to work effectively. This wasn't a lack of treatment, it was a profound understanding that the body itself was the primary healer, and sleep was the optimal environment for that healing to occur. The papyrus even details how to prop a patient up in a specific position to facilitate this restorative rest, showing a meticulous attention to the practicalities of recovery. Conversely, the Ebers Papyrus, a vast encyclopedia of Egyptian medical knowledge, reveals a more complex and cautionary view. While it all prescribes sleep for certain conditions, it contains explicit warnings against oversleeping, which is seen as a symptom of imbalance or even a cause of illness itself. The Egyptians believed too much sleep could lead to a stagnation of the body's vital energies, a lethargy that invited disease. This reflects their core philosophy of mat balance. Just as too little sleep could fray one's connection to the cosmic order and leave the body vulnerable, too much sleep could drown a person in a stagnant pool of their own energy, disconnecting them from the active, waking world necessary for health. A physician would therefore diagnose a patient suffering from chronic oversleeping as being out of balance, and their treatment would aim to restore their natural rhythm. For more serious interventions, Egyptian doctors moved from merely prescribing sleep to actively orchestrating it. They possessed a sophisticated knowledge of anesthetics, using their herbal pharmacopoeia to induce a state of unconsciousness for surgical procedures. As we touched on earlier, they would create potent sedative cocktails from opium poppy, mandrake root, and possibly the bitter sap of wild lettuce, dissolving these powerful compounds into wine. A patient facing the agony of a surgical incision or the setting of a compound fracture would be given this mixture to drink, allowing the physician to work while the patient was in a deep, painless sleep. This demonstrates an incredible leap in medical compassion and efficacy, using their understanding of botany and the body to mitigate suffering in a way that wouldn't be matched in Europe for thousands of years. Perhaps most intriguingly, the diagnostic process itself could be deeply intertwined with the dream world. A physician faced with a patient suffering from a mysterious, lingering illness with no obvious physical cause might turn to oneiromancy or dream interpretation. The patient could be asked to sleep in a specific way, perhaps after a ritual or under the protection of a particular amulet, with the instruction to pay close attention to their dreams. Upon waking, they would recount their vision to the doctor, who would then analyze the symbols much like a priest would, but with a medical focus. A dream of a withered tree might indicate a failing organ, while a dream of a flowing, clean Nile could signal a positive prognosis for recovery. The dream was seen as a diagnostic window into the hidden inner workings of the body and spirit, a direct line to the root cause of the ailment that physical examination alone might miss. This practice beautifully blurs the line between the spiritual and the scientific, showing a medical culture that treated the patient as an integrated whole of body, mind, and spirit, all of which communicated their state of health through the mysterious medium of sleep. But how did an ordinary Egyptian, or even a trained priest, make sense of the often bizarre and cryptic visions that emerged from these nightly journeys? They didn't have to rely on guesswork or personal intuition. The ancient Egyptians were, in many ways, the world's first great systematizers of the subconscious, and they left behind detailed manuals that functioned as the definitive guide to the dream world. The most famous of these is the Chester Beatty Papyrus, a remarkable document that reads less like a mystical text and more like a rigorous medical or legal reference book. This papyrus, and others like it, presents an organized, almost scientific catalog of dreams, meticulously categorizing them as either favorable or unfavorable, and providing a direct interpretation for each specific scenario. This dream book operates on a principle of symbolism that could be strikingly literal yet deeply metaphorical. For instance, the text tells us that if a man sees himself in a dream eating crocodile flesh, this is a decidedly unfavorable omen. It doesn't symbolize a vague sense of danger. It very specifically means he will experience betrayal at the hands of someone in a position of authority, the crocodile being a creature of immense power and lurking deception. Conversely, dreaming of drinking warm beer was a favorable sign, but not merely a prediction of a refreshing beverage. In a culture where beer was a dietary staple and a symbol of sustenance, warm beer indicated that a period of suffering was coming to an end and relief was on the way. Even a simple act like seeing a large cat in a dream was an excellent portent, signaling that a bountiful harvest was imminent, linking the fertility of the land to the protective and nurturing aspects of feline deities like Bastet. The interpreters who wielded these manuals were not mere fortune tellers. They were highly trained professionals, almost always priests who had a revered place in society. Their expertise was considered a form of sacred knowledge, a direct line to understanding the will of the gods. When a person, whether a common farmer or a high official, experienced a powerful or disturbing dream, they would seek out one of these specialists. The process was a formal consultation. The dreamer would recount their vision in precise detail, and the priest-interpreter would then carefully cross-reference the narrative and its symbols against the codified lists in the dream book. Their role was to act as a translator, converting the divine, symbolic language of the dream into practical, actionable advice for the waking world. The scope of this advice was breathtakingly comprehensive, covering every conceivable aspect of daily life. A man dreaming of his hair falling out might consult the manual and learn this predicted the loss of his property, prompting him to secure his assets. A woman dreaming of fetching water from a river with a leaky jar might be warned of wasted efforts in a business venture, advising her to reconsider a partnership. The interpretations provided guidance on matters of love, health, travel, legal disputes, and financial investments. This system offered a framework for navigating life's uncertainties, providing a sense of control and order in a world that often felt governed by invisible and capricious forces. It transformed the anxiety of a strange dream into a problem with a solution, a divine warning with a prescribed course of corrective action. This incredible resource reveals a society that sought to bring order, or mat, to even the most chaotic and personal of human experiences, the dream. They refused to see the subconscious as a random mess of imagery. Instead, they approached it with the same methodical precision they applied to astronomy, medicine, and architecture. The Chester Beatty Dream Book is a powerful testament to the Egyptian desire to understand, categorize, and find meaning in every corner of their existence, believing that the gods spoke in a code that could be cracked, and that the secrets to a better life were hidden in plain sight, waiting to be discovered each night behind their closed eyelids. Moving from the grand architecture of the bedroom to the very surface upon which an Egyptian lay, we find that their meticulous attention to detail extended to the textiles they slept on. The quality and craftsmanship of their bedding were not merely about physical comfort. They were a complex language of social status, spiritual protection, and practical adaptation to their environment. The most common and revered material for sheets and sleepwear was linen, woven from the flax plant that flourished along the Nile. This was a deliberate choice driven by profound practicality. In the searing heat of the Egyptian climate, linen's unique ability to wick moisture away from the body and promote airflow was a godsend. It kept sleepers cool and dry, preventing the irritations and skin ailments that could be caused by sweat-soaked, stifling fabric. This practical benefit was so valued that Egyptian laborers were often paid in bolts of linen, making it a currency of comfort and survival. However, these linens were far from plain. Weavers, who were often women working within temple workshops or large households, would intricately embroider the edges of sheets and sleep garments with powerful protective symbols. The most common pattern was the hieroglyph for life, the ankh, or a repeating border of the protective wedged eye. This wasn't mere decoration, it was a form of permanent, active magic. As the sleeper tossed and turned throughout the night, their body would be in constant contact with these woven spells, their movements believed to activate the symbol's power, creating a dynamic shield that enveloped them until morning. The very act of sleeping became a ritual that reinforced these protective charms with every slight shift in position. Beneath these enchanted sheets lay the mattress, which was typically a simple but effective affair stuffed with dried woven palm fibers. This filling was chosen for its resilience and, again, its breathability, but the Egyptians displayed a remarkably modern understanding of hygiene and seasonal comfort here. These palm fiber mattresses were not permanent fixtures. They were changed seasonally. As the intense heat of summer gave way to cooler winter nights, a household might add more layers of stuffing for extra warmth, or simply replace the old, compacted fibers with fresh, springy ones to ensure a more comfortable and supportive rest. This practice of renewal also had a spiritual dimension, mirroring the cyclical rebirth of the natural world and ensuring the sleeping surface itself remained pure and free from any stagnant energy. The stark difference between the commoner and the elite, however, was breathtaking. While a farmer's family might sleep on a simple palm fiber mat placed directly on the floor with a coarse linen sheet, the pharaoh's bed was a masterpiece of material science and sacred art. His linens were of the finest, most gossamer thin weave, a fabric so delicate it was described as being like woven air, but the true mark of divinity was the incorporation of gold. Tiny threads of beaten gold leaf would be woven directly into the fabric, creating shimmering patterns depicting gods, protective hieroglyphs, and scenes of royal power. The weight and slight stiffness of this gold-threaded linen would have been negligible compared to its immense symbolic value. To sleep wrapped in gold was the ultimate assertion of divinity. Gold was known as the flesh of the gods, a metal that was incorruptible, eternal, and radiant like the sun. By enveloping himself in it, the pharaoh was quite literally clothing himself in the divine essence, creating a physical and spiritual barrier that was considered impenetrable to evil. The flickering light of an oil lamp would have made these golden threads dance and glitter, transforming the royal bed into a miniature piece of the sun's own realm, a sacred space where the living god could safely commune with his celestial family. The bedding, therefore, became the final and most intimate layer of a vast protective system, a daily reaffirmation of power, privilege, and connection to the eternal, ensuring that even in his most vulnerable state, the ruler of Egypt was untouchable, wrapped in the very skin of the gods. For the ancient Egyptians, the profound importance of sleep did not end with death. It was, in fact, an essential part of the journey that followed. They believed so deeply in the continuity of daily existence into the afterlife that they made meticulous provisions for it, ensuring the deceased would have everything required for a comfortable and protected eternal slumber. This is why archaeologists have discovered tombs stocked not just with food and jewelry, but with perfectly crafted beds, personalized headrests, and even intricate models of entire bedrooms. These weren't symbolic offerings, they were functional necessities for the soul's new life. The tomb itself was referred to as the Purjet, or House of Eternity, and just as a living person's home had a bedroom for nightly renewal, the eternal home required one for the soul's everlasting rest. The most common and vital item included was the burial bed itself. These were not mere pallets, but often beautifully crafted pieces of furniture, sometimes even the actual bed the person had used in life, now repurposed for eternal use. For those of more modest means, a model or a painting of a bed on the tomb wall would suffice, its magical essence activated by funerary spells to serve the same purpose. Placed alongside it would be the deceased's headrest, that crucial protective talisman. To be buried without one would be to face eternity utterly vulnerable, with no guardian to watch over the soul as it cycled through its perpetual rest and rebirth. These funerary headrests were often made of stone, like limestone or calcite, materials chosen for their permanence and durability, meant to last for literal eternity. Inscriptions on them were even more potent, calling upon Osiris, the king of the afterlife, to personally place yourself under the head of the deceased, offering divine protection that never faded. For the wealthiest members of society, this provisioning could be astonishingly elaborate. Some royal and elite tombs contain complete model bedrooms, miniature dioramas made of wood and faience that depicted the deceased in their bed, surrounded by servants and protective deities. These models were magical insurance policies. Their purpose was to activate eternally, using Heka magic to transform into a full-sized, fully functional bedroom in the afterlife, ensuring the soul would never want for comfort or protection. It was a physical guarantee that the sacred architecture of sleep, the aligned bed, the protective amulets, the enchanted linens, would continue uninterrupted forever, maintaining the cosmic order of Maat in the realm of the dead just as it had in the land of the living. This entire process was governed and empowered by the sacred words found in funerary texts like the Book of the Dead. These were not stories to be read, but manuals of spells to be spoken, providing the deceased with the precise incantations needed to navigate the afterlife. Among the many chapters were specific spells dedicated solely to the act of sleep and waking. One powerful spell, often inscribed on a headrest or a papyrus placed near the body, was designed to transform a sleep into an awakening. This wasn't about preventing sleep. It was about ensuring that the soul's nightly journey into the depths of the Jewat, the underworld, would always be successful, and that the individual would always reawaken, reborn with the morning sun. The spell was a magical safeguard against eternal unconsciousness, a promise that the cycle of renewal would continue without end. Another critical spell focused on the transformation into a living Ba, the soul that could travel freely. This incantation was recited to ensure that the soul could leave its mummified body each night to journey and commune with the gods, returning each morning without obstruction. It guaranteed that the most cherished aspect of earthly sleep, the divine communion and prophetic revelation, would remain a permanent feature of existence beyond death. The ultimate goal was to join the circumpolar stars, the imperishable ones, in a state of eternal, perfect rest and renewal. By being buried with their beds and their spells, the ancient Egyptians sought to seamlessly extend the sacred habits of a lifetime into an eternity, proving that for them, a good night's sleep was truly a matter of life and death. Each evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the world grew still, the ancient Egyptian home transformed into a sacred space, buzzing with a final, vital round of spiritual activity. This was not a time for mere relaxation before bed. It was a crucial period of preparation, a series of deliberate rituals performed to fortify the home and its inhabitants against the unseen perils of the night. The entire family would participate, creating a collective shield of devotion and magic that turned their dwelling into a fortress for the vulnerable hours ahead. At the heart of this nightly routine was the act of making offerings to the gods who watched over the domestic sphere, a practice that blurred the line between the divine and the daily grind of life. The most important of these household deities was undoubtedly Bes, the dwarf god whose grotesque, leonine face was a welcome sight in any Egyptian bedroom. Unlike the majestic, distant gods of the great temples, Bes was intimately involved in the day-to-day concerns of the family. As the protector of childbirth, children, and sleep, his presence was especially invoked at night. A typical ritual would involve the head of the household retrieving a small statue or carved image of Bes from its special niche. This figurine wasn't hidden away, it was a working part of the home's spiritual infrastructure. The family would gather around it, offering a small libation of beer or a few morsels of food, a humble supper for their divine guardian. This is not a grand sacrifice, but a gesture of reciprocity and respect, a way of saying, "We honor you, now please do your job." They might anoint the statue with a drop of perfumed oil, the scent itself believed to be pleasing to the gods and protective against foul spirits. Accompanying these physical offerings were spoken prayers, whispered directly to Bes as the final light faded. These were not vague, generalized requests for a good night's sleep. They were specific, potent petitions for protection. A parent might pray, "O Bes, whose face turns back evil, stand watch over this house tonight. Let no demon pass the threshold. Let no nightmare find my child. Let no Aku steal the breath from our lips as we sleep." The prayers acknowledged the very real dangers they believed were lurking in the darkness and placed their trust in Bes's fierce power to keep them at bay. His frightening appearance was their greatest comfort, as they believed it would be far more terrifying to any malevolent spirit than the spirit could ever be to them. But the protection didn't stop with the household gods. For an added layer of security, particularly for the soul's journey, families of means would call upon even more ancient and powerful magic. They would recite spells, not from the more famous Book of the Dead reserved for the afterlife, but from a collection known as the coffin texts. These texts were a sprawling repository of magical incantations originally written inside the coffins of nobles during the Middle Kingdom, but their use gradually filtered into daily life for those who could access them. A father, perhaps a minor official or a skilled artisan, might unroll a small papyrus scroll and, by the flickering light of an oil lamp, read a chosen spell aloud for his family to hear. The words themselves were believed to have creative power. By speaking them into the evening air, the family was actively weaving a shield of protective energy around their home. A typical spell from the coffin text used for this purpose might be something like, "I have encircled myself with the flame of Ra, a wall of fire that the dead cannot cross. My sleep is the sleep of Horus, guarded and holy. My awakening is the awakening of Osiris, victorious and renewed." This incantation did several things at once. It invoked the supreme power of the sun god Ra, it claimed the sacred status of the god Horus for their own sleep, and it linked their hope for awakening to the resurrection of Osiris. It was a verbal amulet, its power amplified by the collective belief and focus of the family listening in the dim light. This entire ritual, the offering to Bes, the personal prayers, the recitation of ancient spells, was a profound act of collective security. It brought the family together in a shared mission of spiritual defense, reinforcing their bonds to each other and to their gods. As each member finally lay down on their headrest, they did so with the palpable sense that they had done everything in their power to ensure their safety. The smell of the offered oil might still linger in the air. The image of Bes's face was fresh in their mind, and the powerful words of the coffin text echoed in their memory. This meticulous nightly routine was the final, critical step in preparing for the great unconscious voyage, turning the simple act of going to bed into a powerful, family-affirming ritual that sealed their home against the chaos of the night. The ancient Egyptian approach to sleep extended far beyond the bedroom and into the kitchen, where diet was considered a powerful tool for manipulating the night's journey. Their evening meals were not just about satisfying hunger, but were carefully calibrated rituals designed to either invite divine visions or shield the sleeper from harm. The staples of their diet, bread, beer, and onions, were believed to possess specific properties that could directly influence the soul's voyage during its miniature death. A meal heavy in these ingredients, consumed at a specific time before rest, was a form of edible magic, a final preparation of the body's vessel for the experiences to come. Bread and beer, the twin pillars of the Egyptian diet, were far more than simple sustenance. They were deeply entwined with the gods themselves. Osiris was credited with teaching humanity agriculture, and the brewing of beer was a sacred art. Consuming these staples in the evening was believed to ground the soul, providing a familiar, comforting energy that would help guide it back to the body at dawn. However, the type of bread mattered. Bread made from emmer wheat was standard, but there is evidence to suggest that for specific ritual purposes, bread might be made with added herbs or even slight traces of barley ergot, a fungus with psychoactive properties that could potentially lower the threshold for visionary experiences. This wasn't a daily practice, but a specialized one, perhaps used by priests or those seeking a particularly potent dream. Beer, a thick, nutrient-rich brew that was less alcoholic than its modern equivalent, was a common feature of the evening meal and was also a key ingredient in many medicinal and sleep potions. Its mild sedative qualities were well understood. A cup of beer before bed would gently ease the transition into sleep, calming the body and quieting the mind to make it more receptive. But again, the intention behind its consumption was key. Drinking beer to facilitate a divine encounter was different from drinking it for pleasure. It was often consumed with a prayer or a quiet intention, transforming a simple dietary act into a sacred sip, a liquid key for the gates of dreams. Then, there was the humble onion, a food the Egyptians held in surprisingly high esteem for its metaphysical properties. Its layered structure was seen as a symbol of the eternal layers of the universe, and its strong, pungent odor was believed to have apotropaic qualities, the ability to ward off evil spirits. The principle was similar to the grotesque image of Bes. A powerful, unpleasant smell would repel malevolent entities that might be drawn to a vulnerable sleeper. Eating onions before bed, or even placing a peeled onion in the room, was thought to create a protective olfactory barrier, ensuring that any spirits that ventured near would be so offended by the scent they would flee, leaving the dreamer to commune only with benevolent gods. Despite these strategic uses of food, Egyptian medical texts also reveal a remarkably modern understanding of the dangers of overindulgence. The Ebers Papyrus contains clear warnings against eating a heavy meal immediately before sleep, stating that it could lead to a fighting spirit in the belly and prevent the body from achieving the rest it needed for true renewal. Physicians observed that digestive discomfort could lead to restless sleep, disturbing nightmares, and a general sense of lethargy upon waking. They correctly surmise that a body struggling to process a large amount of food could not fully engage in the restorative processes of sleep, leaving a person physically drained rather than rejuvenated. This created a fascinating balance in their dietary philosophy. On one hand, they believed in the targeted, ritual use of specific foods to achieve a spiritual goal. On the other, they advocated for moderation and timing for the sake of physical health. The ideal was to consume a satisfying, but not overly large meal a few hours before retiring, allowing the body to begin its digestive process while still awake. This practice ensured that by the time the individual lay down on their protective headrest, their body was not burdened by the labor of digestion and was free to focus its energy on the soul's journey and the body's cellular repair. This holistic view, which considered both the symbolic power of food and its direct physiological impact, showcases the sophisticated and integrated nature of Egyptian thought, where every bite was a potential prayer and every meal a step toward a safer, more revealing night. Even with their sophisticated spiritual frameworks and protective rituals, the ancient Egyptians were not immune to the torment of disrupted sleep. Their medical papyri reveal a clear and clinical recognition of what we now classify as sleep disorders, conditions they attributed to a complex interplay of physical imbalance and supernatural interference. Among the most vividly described was a condition they called a white night, a stark and poetic term for what we know as insomnia. This wasn't merely a night of poor rest. It was described as a state of agonizing, sun-bright wakefulness in the pitch black of night, a forced and exhausting alertness where the soul was denied its necessary journey. A sufferer was trapped in a painful limbo, neither fully awake and productive nor asleep and renewing, cut off from both the world of the living and the world of the gods. The Egyptian diagnosis for such ailments was rooted in their understanding of the body's internal mechanics, a system governed by the flow of metaphysical fluids or channels they called medu. Physicians believed that an imbalance in these channels, or a blockage caused by putrid substances, could physically prevent the natural onset of sleep. A digestive ailment, for instance, might create excess heat or a foul substance that would rise to the head, creating a physical barrier to unconsciousness. They saw the body as a hydraulic system of sorts, and sleep required all its fluids to be flowing in correct balance and harmony. A white night was a clear signal that this internal irrigation had failed, that the body's own landscape was out of alignment with the cosmic order of man. Yet, for cases where the cause was not so clear-cut, the explanation often turned to the spiritual. If a patient showed no obvious physical symptoms, a physician might diagnose an attack by a ghost or a demon, the dreaded Aku, or another malevolent spirit. The symptoms of what we would call sleep paralysis, with its feeling of a crushing weight on the chest and a terrifying presence in the room, were seen as direct evidence of a spirit attempting to steal the breath or prevent the soul from returning. Similarly, sleepwalking was not seen as a psychological phenomenon, but as a form of spiritual hijacking, where a wandering soul became lost or was led astray by a deceptive entity, causing the body to physically act out its disorientation. The treatments prescribed were as holistic as their diagnoses, blending practical herbal medicine with potent magic to address both the physical and spiritual roots of the disorder. For insomnia caused by internal imbalance, the Ebers Papyrus recommends a number of soothing herbal teas. A common remedy was a warm drink made from the leaves of the lettuce plant, valued for its mild sedative latex, or an infusion of chamomile and date kernels, known for their calming properties. These were not casual home remedies, but precise pharmaceutical prescriptions, with exact measurements for the ingredients and instructions for preparation. The goal was to cool the body, settle the medu, and gently coax the nervous system into the state of tranquility required for sleep. For more stubborn cases, or those suspected to be of supernatural origin, the treatment escalated to include complex magical rituals. A physician, who was also a trained priest, might recite spells from the Herbal Papyrus directly over the patient. These incantations were commands, not requests. One powerful spell for insomnia calls upon the god Horus, declaring, "O Horus, thou art come that thou mayest see thy father in the sacred eye drive out the enemy who is in my metu, who hold my limbs awake." The spell actively enlisted a deity to battle the internal or external force causing the sleeplessness. The words themselves were believed to have creative power, physically altering the patient's reality and driving out the invasive influence. Often, the two approaches were seamlessly combined into a single treatment. A patient might be given a medicinal tea to drink, but the cup itself would be first encircled by a sacred amulet, or the liquid would be poured over a stone statue of Bes to infuse it with his protective power before consumption. The medicine treated the body, while the ritual treated the spirit. A sufferer of sleepwalking might be treated with a poultice applied to the soles of the feet, a physical attempt to ground the wandering soul, while a priest chanted a spell to bind the spirit to the body more securely each night. This multifaceted approach reflects the Egyptian world view perfectly. A health problem was never just physical or just spiritual. It was a disruption of one's entire place in the universe, and the cure had to restore balance on every level, from the channels of the body to the relationship with the gods, ensuring that each night could once again become the sacred, restorative journey it was meant to be. This deep communal approach to sleep was far more than a simple matter of conserving space or heat. It was a sophisticated social structure woven directly into the architecture of the Egyptian home and the fabric of their nightly rituals. While the master of the house might retire to an inner chamber or a rooftop space for privacy and celestial alignment, the rest of the household, servants, extended family, and children would often gather together in a common room to share the night. This wasn't a haphazard pile of bodies, but a carefully ordered arrangement that mirrored the strict hierarchies of their waking life. The most senior servant or eldest family member would claim the prime spot, perhaps a raised platform or a space against the warmest wall, while others radiated outward based on their status, with the youngest or lowest ranking members on the outer edges, closer to the perceived dangers of the doorway or the cool night air. This physical closeness served multiple crucial purposes. In the chill of a desert night, which can be surprisingly cold, the collective body heat of the group was a vital source of warmth, a practical solution long before central heating. More importantly, in a world teeming with perceived supernatural threats, there was immense safety in numbers. The fear of an aku or a demonic attack was significantly lessened when one was surrounded by the living breath and warmth of others. The soft sounds of nearby sleepers, the rhythm of their breathing, the occasional rustle of linen created a comforting auditory blanket that could soothe anxieties and reinforce a powerful sense of collective security. A child frightened by a bad dream could immediately reach out and touch a parent or sibling, their fear dispelled by tangible human contact long before it could fester into a full-blown terror. It was within this protected, intimate environment that one of ancient Egypt's most vital cultural traditions flourished: oral storytelling. The hours after sundown, once the day's labor was complete and the household had settled into its communal nest, were the prime time for the transmission of knowledge, history, and faith. In the flickering low light of a single oil lamp, with shadows dancing on the walls, an elder would begin to speak. Their voice, often a low, rhythmic cadence honed by generations of practice, would weave tales of the gods of Ra's perilous journey through the Duat, of Isis's cunning and devotion, of Horus's epic battle against Set for the throne of Egypt. These were not merely bedtime stories to entertain children. They were nothing less than live, interactive lessons in theology, morality, and national identity. A young child listening to the story of Osiris's resurrection was learning the foundational principles of their entire belief system about death and the afterlife. A tale about a pharaoh's victory in battle reinforced notions of loyalty, strength, and the divine right of their ruler. The story served as the glue that bound the community together, passing down values, social codes, and a shared sense of history from one generation to the next in the most natural and memorable way possible. The communal setting amplified the power of this oral tradition. A gifted storyteller could play to the room, using pauses for dramatic effect, modulating their tone to build suspense, and even inviting participation through call and response phrases or familiar refrains that the whole group would chant together. The shared experience of gasping at a dramatic turn in the tale or laughing at the description of Bess scaring away a demon created powerful emotional bonds and reinforced a collective identity. This nightly ritual ensured that even those who could not read or write, the vast majority of the population, were still deeply educated in the complex myths and values of their culture. The bedroom became a classroom, the pillow a desk, and the whispered stories under the stars the most important textbook an Egyptian would ever know. The story of Egyptian sleep is not one of static tradition, but a dynamic evolution, a 3,000-year journey that mirrors the rise, fall, and transformation of the civilization itself. From the stark simplicity of the earliest dynasties to the opulent, cosmopolitan complexity of the empire's peak, the place where an Egyptian laid their head tells a profound story of technological innovation, spiritual adaptation, and the irresistible pull of foreign influence. In the Old Kingdom, the age of the great pyramid builders, sleep was a fundamentally practical affair for the vast majority. The common laborer, the farmer, the artisan, they would have retired each night to a simple sleeping mat woven from reeds or palm fibers, perhaps placed directly on the sun-warmed mud brick floor of their home or atop a low, raised platform to escape drafts and insects. There was a humble, egalitarian quality to this arrangement. Sleep was a necessity, and the focus was on basic comfort and protection from the elements, with spiritual concerns likely addressed through simple household prayers rather than elaborate physical apparatus. This simplicity, however, began to crystallize into something more defined and hierarchical with the emergence of a powerful elite. While the masses slept on mats, the nobility and pharaoh of the Old Kingdom started utilizing low wooden bed frames. These were not the towering structures we imagine today, but they represented a crucial conceptual shift, elevating the body entirely off the ground, creating a defined, sacred space for the soul's journey. These early beds often had footboards but no headboards, and their legs were typically carved into the sturdy, reliable shape of bovine hooves, symbolizing fertility and earthly strength. The headrest, too, evolved from a simple bundled sack of cloth to a carved wooden stand, though its form remained austere, a functional object for a society whose art and architecture prized clean, monumental lines and an enduring sense of order that reflected the stable, confident rule of the god-king. The monumental collapse of the Old Kingdom and the subsequent political fragmentation of the First Intermediate Period shattered this sense of eternal order. In this era of instability, famine, and social upheaval, the familiar cosmic guarantees seemed to vanish. This profound anxiety did not cause Egyptians to abandon their sleep rituals. Instead, it catalyzed a powerful intensification of them. If the state could no longer guarantee protection, then the individual must redouble their own magical defenses. We see a dramatic surge in the use of personal apotropaic objects, amulets, wands, and charms, many of which were specifically associated with sleep and protection. The production of protective headrests inscribed with spells from the coffin texts likely became more common, not just for the elite, but for anyone who could afford a scribe services. Sleep became a more perilous undertaking, and the rituals surrounding it grew more complex and personal, a direct response to the chaos of the waking world. Order was restored with the Middle Kingdom, a renaissance that brought a new sense of refined, centralized power. This cultural and political revival was reflected in the bedroom. Bed frames became more sophisticated, with improved joinery and often a slight incline raising the head higher. There was a new emphasis on craftsmanship and elegance. Most notably, we see the introduction of the first canopies and lightweight wooden frames that could support linen drapes. This was a revolutionary development. The canopy did more than keep out mosquitoes. It created a microcosm, a private, womb-like sanctuary within the larger room. It physically embodied the concept of a protected, sacred space for the soul's journey, an architectural echo of the coffin itself, emphasizing the nightly cycle of death and rebirth. The bedroom was now a purpose-built ritual chamber. The true revolution in Egyptian sleep habits, however, arrived with the New Kingdom. This was the age of empire, a time of unprecedented wealth, international trade, and intense cultural exchange. Egypt's horizons exploded, and its sleeping arrangements transformed accordingly. The simple bovine hoof leg was largely replaced by the far more aggressive and powerful lion paw, a symbol of royal authority and solar power that proclaimed the sleeper's dominance even at rest. Beds became longer, wider, and significantly taller, requiring footstools to climb into, a design almost certainly influenced by contact with the luxurious furnishings of Levantine and Mesopotamian court. This was no longer just a place to sleep. It was a status symbol, a throne for the night. Foreign influence seeped in through more than just design. The New Kingdom saw the introduction of new materials and concepts. The use of thicker, plusher mattresses stuffed with wool instead of plant fibers may have begun here, offering a new level of physical comfort. Perhaps the most significant import was the idea of the true couch, a piece of furniture designed for both daytime reclining and nighttime sleep, reflecting a more relaxed, opulent lifestyle enjoyed by the elite. This era also saw the peak of magical protection, but it was a more confident, imperial magic. Elaborate headrests were inlaid with precious materials and bore the images of a whole pantheon of gods. The walls of royal bedrooms in places like Malkata, the palace of Amenhotep III, were painted with intricate scenes of protective deities, turning the entire room into a permanent ritual tableau. Here, the pharaoh, as the master of an empire, slept within a fortress of art, magic, and imported luxury, his rest a testament to Egypt's power and its complex, ever-evolving relationship with the invisible world that awaited each night. The dry, sterile sands of Egypt have proven to be one of the greatest allies of archaeology, acting as a perfect preservative for organic materials that would have crumbled to dust anywhere else in the world. It is within these arid tombs that we find the most breathtaking and intimate evidence of how the ancient Egyptians actually slept, moving us from theoretical beliefs into the tangible reality of their nightly lives. Perhaps the most stunning single discovery is the collection of beds from the tomb of Tutankhamun. The boy king was buried not with one, but with several elaborate beds, each serving a different ritual purpose for his eternal rest. There was a lion-shaped couch for his journey through the day, and another in the form of a mehet wet cow, a symbol of the sky goddess Hathor, but the most magnificent was a gilded, folding camp bed, inlaid with ebony and ivory. This was no mere piece of furniture. It was a masterpiece of engineering and sacred art. The fact that it folded reveals a practical side. It was likely used during the king's lifetime for travel or military campaigns. But in death, its purpose was transformed. Its gleaming gold surface wasn't just for show, it was the flesh of the gods, a material believed to be incorruptible and radiant with divine power. For Tutankhamun to be buried with it meant he would sleep eternally within a shell of divinity, protected and regenerated by the solar metal itself. The intricate carvings on the bedposts depicted deities like Bes and Tauret, ensuring that even in the afterlife, the protective guardians of sleep were permanently on duty. For a glimpse into the lives of commoners rather than pharaohs, we turn to the workmen's village of Deir el-Medina. This was a highly skilled community of artisans and laborers who built and decorated the royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings. Their own tombs, though more modest, have yielded an incredible array of sleep-related artifacts that paint a vivid picture of daily life. Here, we find simple wooden beds, their legs often carved into the shape of lion paws, a scaled-down version of the royal symbol of power and protection. These were not gilded, but they were sturdy and cherished possessions, often included in wills and passed down through generations. Even more telling are the personal headrests found buried with their owners. Crafted from wood or pottery, these were deeply personal objects, worn smooth from years of use, sometimes even repaired with plaster or new supports, showing how valued they were. One particularly moving find is a simple headrest buried with a child, a small, gently curved piece of wood that speaks to the universal parental desire to protect even the youngest and most vulnerable members of the family in their sleep. Beyond the beds themselves, the dry climate has preserved the most fragile elements of the sleep experience: textiles. In tombs across Egypt, archaeologists have unearthed remnants of linen bedding and sleepwear. These are not coarse rags, but finely woven sheets and garments, some so thin and delicate they are described as being woven of air. The edges are often hemmed with protective symbols like the hieroglyph for life, the Ankh, or the all-seeing wedged eye. To find these textiles is to understand that an Egyptian's physical contact with protection was constant. They slept wrapped in literal cloth spells. Furthermore, the discovery of different weights and weaves of linen suggests a sophisticated understanding of seasonal comfort: lighter sheets for the blistering summer heat and heavier, perhaps layered, bedding for the surprisingly cold desert nights. Perhaps the most extraordinary textual discovery that bridges the gap between belief and practice is a personal dream journal found at Deir el-Medina. This papyrus, belonging to a scribe named Hor of Sebennytos, dates to the Ptolemaic period and provides a stunningly personal look at one man's quest for divine meaning in his dreams. Hor spent years incubating dreams in a temple, recording his visions and his petitions to the gods for answers. His journal is not a formal literary text, it's a raw, first-hand account. He writes of dreaming of gods like Thoth and Bes, and he meticulously notes which nights were successful and which were not. This single document transforms our understanding from a general cultural practice to an individual's passionate spiritual pursuit. It shows us that the elaborate rituals of temple sleep were actively used by real people, who invested immense time and hope in receiving a divine message that could alter their fate, proving that the mystical world of dreams was as real and immediate to them as the rising sun. This profound and intricate relationship the Egyptians had with sleep isn't just a historical curiosity, it echoes with remarkable relevance in our modern world, where sleep disorders are rampant and the quest for a good night's rest feels more pressing than ever. While we may not believe our souls are traveling to commune with gods, the core principles they understood: the sacredness of the environment, the power of ritual, and the deep connection between mind, body, and spirit, now being validated by the very science that once might have dismissed them as superstition. Their holistic view of sleep, which saw no separation between the physical need for rest and the spiritual need for meaning, offers a powerful, forgotten blueprint that could profoundly reshape our own exhausted modern lives. Consider the modern science of sleep hygiene, a set of recommendations designed to optimize our environment and habits for better rest. The first pillar is a cool, dark, and quiet room. The ancient Egyptians, without any understanding of melatonin or circadian rhythms, perfected this intuitively. They sought the coolest part of the home, often sleeping on rooftops to catch the breeze, and their use of thick mud brick walls created a naturally sound, dampened, dark environment. Their north or east bed alignment was spiritual, but it also physically positioned them away of the rising sun's direct glare, allowing for a more gradual and natural awakening. Even their choice of linen bedding, which we now know is one of the most breathable thermoregulating fabrics available, was a perfect adaptation to their climate for uninterrupted comfort. They engineered their entire sleeping space for optimal physical conditions, achieving through cultural practice what we now strive for with blackout curtains, white noise machines, and temperature control. The second pillar of modern sleep advice is a consistent wind-down routine, a signal to the brain that it's time to shift gears. The Egyptians elevated this into a high art form. Their nightly offerings to Bes, the recitation of protective spells, and the anointing with sacred oils weren't just religious acts. They were a sophisticated form of cognitive behavioral therapy for sleep. This deliberate, mindful routine created a powerful psychological barrier between the stresses of the day and the peace of the night. It allowed them to release anxieties and consciously prepare for vulnerability, effectively quieting their racing thoughts long before they ever laid their head on their amulet-inscribed headrest. In our terms, they were practicing mindfulness and meditation, using ritual to achieve the state of mental calm that sleep experts now tell us is critical for falling asleep easily. Perhaps the most striking parallel is in the emerging field of oneirology, the scientific study of dreams. While we now understand dreams as a neurological process of memory consolidation and emotional processing, the Egyptians were right about their potential for problem solving and introspection. Their practice of dream incubation, posing a question to themselves before sleep with the expectation of an answer, is a technique being rediscovered. Modern studies suggest that the brain can continue to work on complex problems during sleep, and that setting an intention before bed can indeed influence dream content. They may have attributed the resulting insight to a god, but the mechanism tapping into the subconscious mind's incredible processing power was very real. They turned their dream world into a tool for healing and guidance, a concept we are only beginning to explore with any seriousness. This is where their philosophy becomes truly transformative for us. We live in a culture that often views sleep as a nuisance, a blank space in productivity to be minimized or medicated away. We see it as a purely biological function, a maintenance mode for the body. The ancient Egyptians saw it as a vital, active, and purposeful part of life. They didn't just sleep to recharge their batteries, they slept to heal, to receive wisdom, to solve problems, and to connect with something larger than themselves. This shift in perspective, from seeing sleep as lost time to valuing it as gained insight, could be the most valuable lesson they offer. What if, instead of desperately counting sheep, we began our nights with a moment of reflection, setting an intention not just to sleep, but to learn from our sleep? What if we viewed our bedroom not just as a place to collapse, but as a sanctuary we carefully prepare for a journey? The Egyptian model suggests that true rest isn't just the absence of wakefulness, it is the presence of an intentional, holistic practice. It combines the physical, a comfortable, optimized environment with the psychological, a calming ritual, and the spiritual, a sense of purpose and meaning in the act of rest itself. We may not need to carve spells into our headboards or make offerings to a dwarf god, but we can learn from the principle. We can create our own modern rituals, whether it's a few minutes of journaling, a meditation on the day, or simply expressing gratitude. We can be more mindful of turning our bedrooms into havens of peace, free from the blue light and digital chatter that shatters our sense of tranquility. By embracing their holistic view, we can reclaim sleep not as a biological obligation, but as a sacred daily renewal, a time to heal not just our bodies, but our minds and spirits as well. In re-enchanting our nights, we might just find the deep, restorative rest that has become so elusive, discovering that the ancient path to a better tomorrow begins with how we choose to close our eyes tonight. So as we've journeyed through the world of ancient Egyptian sleep, it becomes undeniably clear that their entire approach defies our modern logic at almost every turn. We don't just see a different set of habits, we see a completely different reality. Where we see a biological necessity, they saw a sacred bridge to the divine. Our soft, plush pillows are designed for comfort. Their hard, elevated headrests were enchanted guardians, carved with spells and the fearsome face of the god Bes to repel demons. We might hope for a pleasant dream. They actively petition the gods for prophetic visions and a formal practice of dream incubation, spending nights in temple sanctuaries to receive divine diagnoses and guidance. We try to optimize our sleep environment for silence and darkness. They align their beds with celestial bodies, choosing north for eternal stability or east for daily rebirth, turning their entire bedroom into a cosmic resonator. This was never just about rest. It was a multidimensional experience weaving together medicine, magic, architecture, astronomy, and profound spirituality into a single, seamless practice. They consumed sleep potions of opium and mandrake not merely as sedatives, but as sacraments to open the gates of perception. They feared sleep paralysis not as a neurological glitch, but as a literal attack by a malevolent spirit. Even the Pharaoh's dreams were matters of state security, believed to directly influence the flooding of the Nile and the fate of the nation. Every single aspect of their night was intentional, purposeful, and deeply connected to a cosmos alive with meaning and interaction. Their worldview challenges the very core of how we perceive consciousness, suggesting that the line between the waking world and the spiritual realm is far more porous than we could ever imagine. They teach us that sleep is not an empty void to be rushed through, but a rich frontier for healing, discovery, and connection. So while you think about these ancient secrets, could their holistic view of rest hold a key to the sleep anxieties we face today? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing your perspectives. And if you've enjoyed unraveling this mystery with us, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell for more journeys into the incredible secrets of the past.